And so it's a technique that's really open to, to any kind of student. Now, Mike mentioned my name. I do have a great last name, Kyriakoutas. And you might think that's a long name to pronounce, and that's true. But you know what? In this age of Google, when I want to find out what's about me on the internet, I have a very easy job, and I feel sorry for the people who do this. So, because there aren't that many Kyriakoutases. It's a good Greek name. Let me talk about oral history and kind of give you a sense as to what oral history is, what I think oral history is, which is my own kind of idiosyncratic view. Now, I know you're all history teachers, and so you all know what history is, right? I mean, what do you think history? What's your view, your working definition of history as a way of knowing the world?
Just as some simply just tales of the past, but
tales of the past.
Goes beyond that, but
that's okay. Yeah, that's good. Anybody else? I mean, you've been working on it, all these tales of the past. That's good. Narratives.
I think it's a person's perception of what happened in the past. One person's perception, because two people see the same thing and not have the same point of view.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what people understand and interpret, and the interpretive element is really important in understanding what history is, because you know, it's, I mean, on one hand it is objective. I mean, historians do objective research. We, you know, there are facts. You know, there are data, and the like. But how we put that together in tales, perspectives, and narratives is quite complex, and that's where the interpretive element comes in. Yeah, I've always thought it was a study of, you know, it's like a nuts and bolts, a study of change over time. And the time element is critical in history. You know, narratives are stories, they have beginnings, middles, and ends. So just something to think about, the study of change over time in human affairs. For oral historians, we love narratives. And I don't know how much you all know about, you know, how historians, you know, at universities and you know, that publish, do their work. But you know, there's lots of ways to do it. There are historians that are more kind of, you know, literary and humanistic, and then there's historians that are more kind of technical. My original training is in economic history, so you know, I never met a graph I didn't like. I love numbers and have published some fairly sophisticated quantitative work. But I also love stories. And to me, there's not a difference. Because, as you were saying, a perspective, or as you said, a tale, you know, a narrative is, you know, a story where you've ordered the facts and put a beginning, a middle, and the end. That you've right there begun the process of creative interpretation, of putting together your understanding of the past. You know, you've determined that some facts are more important than others, some events, some individuals, some personalities. And within those personalities, some decisions that they made were more important than others, and therefore worthy of inclusion into the narrative. And in the end, when you have a story, you have created an explanation. And this is really important to remember when you interview people, because that's exactly what people do when they share with you their story. I mean, memory does not work, and the brain does not work in a manner that allows you to sit down and you say, well, tell me everything that happened. Well, okay, I was born. I don't remember too much of that, but I took a step. And then, you know, I ate. You know, that's not what people do when they tell you their story. They sit down and they tell you the things that have meaning to them, that are most important to them. And that's another way of saying they're giving an explanation. And, you know, if you've maybe had a presentation or have thought about how there are differing interpretations about, you know, the origins of the Constitution, you know, Charles Beard and the economic origins of the Constitution, you know, the intellectual origins, and historians and other scholars come up with these debates and they fight over them, and who's right and who's wrong, and you know, what was the Civil War inevitable or blending generation? These are older. You know, what caused the Civil War and that kind of thing. All those are just kind of, you know, very sophisticated competing narratives. competing stories about how the past worked. And so in that sense, when someone sits down with you, let's say you're going to do an interview with somebody, and you say, well, you know, tell me what happened. Really what you're asking them is telling me, you're really asking them, and they'll interpret it this way, you know, tell me why this is important to you. And they're giving you an explanation. And it's no different, at least theoretically, than what historians who are publishing, because they're having tenure and all those other things, when they write about the cause of the Civil War, or the meaning of the Constitution, or the nature of Jacksonian America, or any of these other great debates that we study in American history. So narratives, they're at the core of how we understand our history. And in many ways, narratives are power. This is one of the most interesting aspects of historical writing right now. Historians are actually writing about memory. And the way that some aspects of public memory, some stories get included and some don't. And Civil War is a good example. A good historian and a good friend of mine, Fitzhugh Brundage, at the University of North Carolina, has a book called Southern Memory. And the first section of the book is about how in the 1870s, all across the South, African-American communities had commemorative rituals to celebrate the Civil War. They weren't celebrating the same part that Nathan Bedford Forrest and his crew was celebrating. I mean, they were celebrating, the process of self-emancipation and their role in the Union War effort, fighting for the United States. And those rituals persisted, into the 1880s and even into the 1890s, and either were suppressed or passed as a complicated history. But then that fades from the narrative, and the story becomes something different. The lost cause, the failure of will of the Southern Confederacy to win, the failure of leadership. They all started fighting, and they published their memoirs, and they immediately started fighting over why they lost. That's an interesting aspect. A guy named J.E. Pollard started it first. And many of them blame Jefferson Davis, by the way. But in any case, these are competing narratives, and so they're just competing explanations. Again, when you talk to people, you're going to help them. You're going to understand, or you're going to deal with these kinds of stories. Now, I'm old-fashioned enough, I really am, that not only does history help us understand people and societies and change, but I do think it contributes to moral understanding. I won't go any farther than that, but I do think history is critical to inform citizenship. Members of a republic where we're citizens, not subjects. There's a lot. It's kind of heavily packed language there, but I do think that history is important in that way, and oral history in particular, because it gets you down to the level of human experience, direct human experience into narrative. Finally, identity and collective memory. That's exactly what I was referring to a minute ago. So I think that's part of how people understand where they are and who they are. And oral history is local history. And that's the great thing about it. It comes from the bottom up. It's people in your community who have lived through some experience, war, civil rights movement, just working for the railroad. Our office has this terrific project that was done in 2002 and 2003 by the Mississippi Humanities Council and the Macomb Railroad Museum, interviewing railroad workers. And it's absolutely riveting material about the history of the railroad. And, how railroads changed over time, the role of race in the railroad and work. And I'm going to play some examples. So all history is local. And you can ask big questions in small places. I mean, just because you're doing a project with some high school students or junior high school students, middle school students, and you're interviewing people in your community, doesn't mean you can't ask big questions about how America has changed, how our economy and society has changed, how our politics have changed. Just ask people that participated in it. Genealogy. This is an important part of history as well. Narratives of family relationships are important. They help center us. They're good for everybody to know. Lots of young people many of them don't have strong senses of where they come from. And for them to go to talk to an older relative, a grandparent, or a great uncle or a great aunt, or what have you, and to say, well, help me sort out who we're related to. And just go back as far as you can remember. That's a powerful technique. Some of the people closer to my age might remember Alex Haley's Roots in the 1970s, which was a riveting program. And Haley got started in this by going to West Africa and talking to these elders in these traditional communities whose job it was to remember, kind of keepers of the community memory. And he, with translators, and helped interview these people to find how far back they could remember. And he was able to piece the story that later became Roots. Now, was every part of it absolutely exact? No, I mean, there's going to be some error there, but that's basically what he did. So, if you think about this as a genealogy, I mean, this is one of the most sweeping and dramatic stories we have in American history. And it starts with a kind of genealogical recitation. And again, genealogy is important. Those of you that know your Bible, like the book of Numbers, from the beginning to the book of Numbers is just, genealogy. And in the Gospels as well, establishing, Jesus' genealogy. And so these really matter, for people in that particular faith tradition. Oral history is a very public outreach.